for this section on page 147, if someone wanted to start reading. It's a longer section, so we can maybe have someone stop halfway and then have someone else pick up.
Hey, Ricken, I can start off and then you can let me know where to go.
Go ahead.
Okay, when the king makes mistakes. In Bhagavatam 4.13.23, both verse and purport discuss the importance of tolerating the king's behavior, even when he is wrong, because the king is a representative of God, Nara Narayana. My first thought in reading this was that this particular conversation in the Bhagavatam is happening between Vidura and Maitreya. Vidura is surprised that the sages, Vidura is surprised that the sages would curse and kill a king. Although Vidura is technically a Sudra due to his mother's being a maidservant, he is the son of Vyasadeva and is the incarnation of Yamraja. His sense of dharma is very sorry guys, give me I'm just gonna read the next two lines and then hand over to somebody else. His sense of dharma is very strong. He's also a pure devotee of Krishna. Therefore, more than anyone, he is qualified to appreciate just how terrible Vena's sin must have been for the sages to have intervened and killed him. Handing over to somebody, please.
Perfect.
Okay, I'll take over.
Go ahead.
In the story about the killing of King Vena, we see that the sages were particularly concerned that the previous king's absence would allow rogues and thieves to torment the citizens. They realized that they needed to install a king as soon as possible. This is why they encouraged Vena to ascend to the throne in the first place. His father had renounced the throne and left for the forest to perform meditation. The sages recognized Vena's cruel nature, but he was the king's son. It is interesting to note here that while the sages wanted Vena to ascend the throne, the ministers were against it. Vena was cruel and wicked by nature. The ministers could never support such a king. The sages, however, seem to have had more influence over the decision, and Vena was enthroned. This contrasts with the example set by King Uttanapada in choosing his son Dhruv to rule after him. Uttanapada consulted the ministers, the Brahmins, and the citizens, then studied Dhruv's qualities himself to ensure that he would be succeeded by a worthwhile son. In Vena's case, Vena's father had already left the palace and no one could find him. The ministers did not agree with the sages, and the kingdom was filled with inauspiciousness because of this. Later, the sages heard of the people suffering and decided to meet with Vena. They warned him that he would be in danger if he continued his cruelty towards others, and in his insistence that worship be stopped in his empire. When he refused to heed them, even blaspheming the Supreme Lord, the sages realized that he must be dethroned if the citizens were to be protected. Vena dealt strictly with criminals, but still his government was poor, being based on principles of cruelty and atheism rather than on goodness and God consciousness. In the end, the Brahmins chanted mantras with the power to kill Vena, and he was thus successfully removed from the throne. The king is supposed to be the representative of God in human form, Naradev or Naranarayana. Therefore, the Srimad Bhagavatam tells us to tolerate the king's acts, even if they appear to be wrong. In Srimad Bhagavatam 4:13-23, it says, "It is the duty of all citizens in the state never to insult the king, even though he sometimes appears to have done something very sinful. Because of his prowess, the king is always more influential than all other ruling chiefs." The key words here are insult and appears. In most ancient cultures, people were reluctant to insult the monarch because as God's representative, he was in a powerful position and was supposed to have divine insight into how to benefit the citizens. The monarch was therefore given much freedom, tolerance, and support. If a monarch made a mistake, the citizens were expected to tolerate it. Now, when we apply this tolerance to modern culture, to communities, and to institutions and corporations, we can see the value of tolerating a leader's mistakes as long as the leader has his dependents' well being in mind. That is, we can tolerate a leader's honest mistakes if his motives are correct. This does not mean that we should deny the mistake, but we can help the leader learn from the mistake. Otherwise, we can use the leader's mistakes to cloud our relationship with him and to take away his influence. It is different when the dependents feel that the mistake was not so honest or that the leader does not have their best interests in mind. In modern society, leaders make many mistakes. This is not such a problem. The real problem is when a leader makes a mistake and tries to cover it up, or when the mistake is part of a general sort of deviance, lack of integrity, lack of ethics or morality, or is done secretively. Such leaders obviously do not have the highest interest of their dependents. When a leader tries to act as if he is free of mistakes, it is worse than if he merely makes mistakes. This is so because it reveals his arrogance, his lack of honesty, which will cause his dependents to lose faith in him. The worst, however, is when a mistake is made by a leader, denied or not denied, and it is based on self-centered interest rather than on the interests of his constituents' welfare. When there is proper servant leadership, then mistakes can be fixed because of the servant leader's honesty. His constituents can help him face the crisis caused by his mistake, and together they can correct it. Great leaders know that mistakes and failures are simply opportunities to understand what is necessary to become successful. Thomas Edison made over 1,000 errors in his pursuit of the developing of the light bulb. Rather than becoming discouraged, he saw each mistake as bringing him closer to success. In that sense, mistakes are not mistakes. In any case, the verse emphasizes that we should not be overly disturbed if we see that our leader makes a mistake. The other key word in this verse is insult. When people lack culture, they tend to overreact. If a leader has made a mistake, a reaction is natural, but to go so far as to insult a good person for his mistake is an overreaction. That people insult their leaders over mistakes is also a sign that they do not see their connection with the leader or with the issue over which the mistake was committed. Servant leaders should therefore build teamship. Building a team means building a culture of trust. Then, if there is a mistake or even an apparent mistake, they will want to help solve the problem it creates rather than denigrate the person who committed it. In a culture of envy, people hope their leaders will make mistakes so that they can tear them down in an attempt to regain their so-called independence. Later, the same Bhagavatam text mentions that Vena was cursed because his sinful activities were grievous. This indicates that Vena did not have good intentions towards his citizens. Rather, he was a self-centered leader, abusive and exploitative. Therefore, the sages took it upon themselves to try to first rectify him, and when that didn't seem to work, they resolved to remove him to bring about his demise. And how did they take his life? They simply chanted mantras. The sages had such power and purity that simply by chanting mantras, they were able to force his soul out of his physical body. This is Vedic culture. The king has great power, but the sages have greater power based on their purity, their performance of austerity, and their knowledge of scripture. Therefore, it was their duty to monitor the king and to be sure he always practiced stewardship toward the people.
Great, thank you. So I just wanted to hear if people had reflections on this section that I think is very relevant, not just to the world we see around us, but also to ourselves. Anything that stood out? Please, Ida. And Ida, good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, sorry I haven't been able to attend the last few weeks. Always great to see you. And I apologize for being late, but what perfect timing to come and hear everything that you read out, Avanti. Can you read so beautifully? So beautiful. Oh wow, this is so real and relevant. So you all know what's happened in Turkey with the earthquakes, and there is such an issue with the government that, like, there is such an issue with a lack of integrity, that what is happening is, you know, here in Australia, immediately people filled containers. Like there was this instant reaction of let's get containers and put stuff in. And I'm from Cyprus, and I was speaking to early hours in the morning to people, friends and family in Cyprus, and they got containers and they filled it up, and it went to Turkey. But it didn't get through to the villages and to the people. Why? Because of that lack of integrity, because of that lack of leadership from the government and the authorities, that they intercepted it. So what is happening now, and I can speak from what's happening here around me, because I'm raising funds as well, but what is happening is this questioning of, well, where's the money's going to go to? Is the people going to receive what you say they're going to receive? So you talk about trust. So now there's this, I don't know, it wouldn't be a cultural, but there's this mistrust that is happening, and then so the impact of that is then those who actually need to be served are not being served. Those who need to be reached in such devastation we aren't able to serve them, and so it's such a challenge. And there is an opportunity here. You talked about mistakes and failures. There's an opportunity for people at the grassroots, like myself, and the communities around me to go, okay, well, how can we be more transparent? So how can we be of more integrity? How can we serve a lot? How can we be of service? And there's such truth in everything you've read, Avantika. It's just such timing. It's definitely had me reflect, and because I just got off the phone, right? It's actually one of the Titans, Chile. I'm working with her. It's just so timely, and so real, guys. Like so real. Just integrity, servant leadership. When you're in that, then there is trust. That there is trust. There is mobilization. There is being of absolute service. Yeah, it just struck my heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Aina. And just that, current, very relevant example on trust and integrity that's happening in the world right now. I think we can all identify with that in different parts of the world with different problems. But thank you for bringing that out. Anybody else had anything to share on this section? Yeah, please, Avantika.
Yeah, I'm so glad. Whenever I read it, I think it's it hits home stronger than if I was just listening to it or reading it.
Definitely. The motivation to read.
Yeah, so it's there were so many things that such a gold mine this whole passage is. But the four ideas I've written down. The first is, I like the role the sages played, and I think in good governance, the separation of church and state is something that's always been relevant. The state must be accountable to an autonomous, so accountability of state was something that came in, and the fact that it must be something that is purely non-governance related, that keeps that was something that really, I think in any good governance, to have an accountability measure which has nothing to do with no political agenda at all, nothing to do with the state. That was something that was very important. I was also, just further to what Aida said, there's just so much in the past decade itself, the past 5 years, we've seen so much mockery made out of governance. We've had the whole Trump situation blown out of, caricaturized almost. We've had in India, we have a lot of, big political, the two opposing. So I was just looking at, the role of the opposition parties, and the role of character. There is something to be said about a certain degree of decorum and respect for people that are representatives of a particular thing. And I think that was something that I personally was reflecting on, because it was read over here that, every human being, including a leader, will make a mistake. But the reaction or the overreaction to that, it actually diminishes the authority of the entire populace. So that was something that I was reflecting on, in my own reactions also to certain things. It's like, does it undermine if one is nitpicking at every, it's like the halo effect, or the opposite aspect of that. If you don't like a person and you are sitting and, shooting, the person is an elected official representing the country or whatever. And every time you're bringing down that person's every simple, statement or word or dress or whatever, it's actually also undermining that by association, that entire office as well, that entire nation as well. I've seen that happen very often in the past. So there's something to be learned from the fact that there must be a great deal of care taken when one is reacting to mistakes by people in elected positions, because they're representing not just themselves, but they're representing something much bigger. But the most important thing that I took out of this was a reflection on how I react when my mistakes are highlighted to me. And I think that's the most important part of this. It does, sometimes when we are in positions of absolute authority, it is important to have people and systems in place that keep us honest, that keep us in integrity. And one must have a great deal of courage to be able to accept that one is not perfect and one has erred. So I think, to me, it was, the question I was asking, I was reading the whole thing, is in the time where someone has brought to my notice that something I have done has had a negative impact, or it has been out of line with what correct behavior would have been. I do recall with great discomfort sometimes an egotistic reaction to that. And what I'm trying to learn now is being more comfortable with the whole premise that whether one is king, leader, or viewer or observer, or someone from the king, whatever role one is playing, the reaction, whether one is on the other side of the table, reacting to the king making the mistake, or when one is on this side of the table, being the king or the queen and making a mistake, it is in the management of the overreaction and that whole trivialization, the caricature, that I think we sometimes lose the plot. That is what I took out of this passage.
Thank you, Avantika. I just wanted to echo the section that really stood out to you, also stood out to me, is how B.T. Swami defines this term overreact. He specifically used the words, but to go as far as to insult a good person for his mistake as an overreaction. And we may think of the word insult as a dramatic, or a big word, but even I can catch myself, even a dig, like this word we use, a dig at somebody, which may seem like a less, maybe a more tame version of an insult. I was just thinking to myself of like my overreactions in the past for other people's mistakes. And so I was just really kind of enlightened to see this very simple definition of what an overreaction is. And it really helped kind of visualize it in my application of my life. So yeah, that was a really powerful point that you shared. And I just really wanted to, just echo that, how much that section hit me. The other two things that really stood out was this important, I think it's very much speaking to this point of importance of transparency in our leadership and how important that transparency is. And I think that is, in any form, not even in government, but even our workplace, when this transparency is not there, I think this is where that loss of trust occurs. So because it's so clear, it paves the way for us to know what to do, right? Just to always be transparent. And the other, the very much principle that came out from the Srimad Bhagavatam was that the decision should always be made what's the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And I think in practical day-to-day functioning, this is usually what's not happening. And so it's easy, it's easy but not simple in its application. And so those are the two points that really stood out to me in this section. Anybody else have any thoughts or comments to share? This, again, really powerful section on what we see in the world, but also I feel how it applies to us. Alicia?
Yeah, I was just really reflecting again. It seems like we are in like a real culture of perfectionism where, you know, when Avantika was speaking, it made me think of this. It's like, we know we're not perfect, but it's almost like we expect perfection. So when leaders or anyone makes a mistake, or even us in our regular lives, it just does seem like there's not much room for that grace when people do make mistakes. So I don't know, it's just kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? It's just very contradictory, because I feel like there are a lot of leaders and people making mistakes, but on the flip side, there's no room or no grace. And I think it's all like, as we've been studying the book, it's coming clear to me that it is from a lack of trust. Like, I just feel like across the board, people aren't trusting each other. So I think that is why there's not a lot of space for grace. So then when anybody makes a mistake, you kind of are anticipating the insults and things coming. So that probably also then leads to a lack of transparency, because everyone knows, well, you know, you see it now, people have to resign their position, they do something wrong, and it's like, well, I'm going to lose my job, I'm going to lose everything. So then people don't want to be transparent. So I really see it as like a vicious cycle that's happening because there is no room for making mistakes.
Yeah, Alicia, just this point on the society we're in, there's such low compassion that
Yes.
it's such a low trust culture that everyone assumes worst case scenario, which usually is many times what unfolds. And also as leaders, if we can, I was just making a note from what you said, make more room for other people's mistakes as a takeaway from what you said. Thank you so much. Ambika?
So kind of building off from Alicia's point on page 149, where I think the lack of grace that we see, or lack of compassion, is probably from the fact that in this modern society, leaders make many mistakes. However, what's amazing is that it goes on to explain, or B.P. Swami goes on to explain, the many mistakes or frequency or volume doesn't seem to be the problem. It's that the fact that they actually try to cover it up. And the mistake is part of a general sort of deviance, lack of integrity, ethics, morality, or done secretly. And I think that corrosion of, and we've covered trust anyways already. I think that starts contaminating culture and relationships, and then creates, just before you know it, it becomes norms in many environments where the lack of trust is there, and therefore compassion becomes precious/scarce. But I think what I found most fascinating was the last paragraph, which is the rishis chanting mantras. And they have power and purity, that they simply chant mantras and force the soul out of the physical body. And like, it sounds so like reading Vedic stuff and understanding mantras at one part of my brain fully just gets it. And then from our current day life, it seems so far removed, like such a different universe altogether. And then the third aspect is in our everyday life, I think that's where, and this was discussed in many sessions earlier, where we talked about having spiritual leaders on boards
or advisory of organizations, where you're not necessarily forcing the soul out of the physical body, but having spiritual advisors that can advise on a human being's integrity and their state of being in organizations is constantly holding that person / team at a C-suite manager, whatever level, the most level of accountability, to operate from the highest level of consciousness. And I think, like, even if we just look at the group in this room, how many of us have that in our businesses or everyday jobs or accountabilities, to have those spiritual mentors that are kind of keeping us on track to operate at high levels of consciousness? Because the lines become so blurry times when something works in our favor to get the job done, right? So it may not be at the extent to which this king's example is given. So we have our own versions of them in this day and age. And so that's just thoughts that came from that.
Yeah, thank you, Ambika. That just this point you're saying that although we don't see it in the world around us, and I think it's a huge missing factor from leadership today, especially modern day politics, that at least we should be open to, if we don't have it, open for ourselves to have it, in our leadership positions. Because as we've always said, that we're, from what we're learning here, we may not be able to implement it, on a large scale, but I think just having it for us could be make a super powerful difference in the world. But such a powerful point you made, and I agree. When you see these last sections about mantras and things happening, it seems completely out of this world at this time, and it just brings a new paradigm to us. And I really think that, at least in modern day leadership, especially for politics, that if we had this, then because there's no accountability for who's in charge, everything erodes from that. Ed, we just wanted to welcome you. How are you? Thanks for joining.
Great. Always relishing the conversation that you guys are having. So thank you for teaching me.
We're in this section of when kings make mistakes, and we're talking about it not only from the point of view of what we're seeing in the world today, but also how it applies to ourselves when we make mistakes or potentially lack integrity or don't have everything we would like in place, to be able to hold other people, make room for other people's mistakes as well.
Wonderful point. Thank you for that. I'll just share something, as I was making some posts for social media, and I was thinking about this point, that what's the difference when a leader makes a mistake, but you know that they care about you, it's an honest mistake, and they're not trying to deflect the blame and not trying to point the finger at other people. It actually can add to the sweetness of the relationship, because then you feel like, okay, something was wrong, but we'll step in, because just like that person supported me and is encouraging me, I'm ready to help them. But the difficulty, and I'm sure many of us have seen this, is when the leader does something wrong and they're arrogant, they're trying to blame other people, and then you just completely lose faith in them. It's like, that's terrible. You made a mistake. That's okay. The mistake isn't the mistake. The mistake is how we've dealt with the mistake. That's really where it just goes completely downhill. Then it's just like, oh, that's a shame, because I honestly believe that we want leaders. Sometimes in the world that we're in, sometimes there's a narrative about how no one should have power. But if you let's say had a loving parent, someone who actually protected you, encouraged you, appreciated you, no one's going to reject that. So it's not, I don't think it's leadership per se that the world has an issue with, but it's that we've seen so many examples of toxic leadership. And so people are a bit disgusted, and we're less likely to give power to anyone if we've had a history of bad experiences of people abusing power, which and I can completely understand that. Just wanted to throw that out.
Yeah, I'm just really appreciating this point about it's not actually the mistake, but how we've responded or managed that mistake that really makes the difference. And that's what B.T. Swami was just, sharing in the last paragraph about, the real problem is when leaders make mistakes and try to cover it up, or when they make a mistake and it's, part of a sort of deviance, lack of integrity, lack of ethics and morality, or done secretively. Ed, do you want to go ahead and chime in with, I know we've had some valuable conversations from exercises in the weeks past, unless anyone else wanted to share anything on this section.
It's quiet, so I'm gonna take that as a sign to step in. So what I'm gonna do is there's a few exercises, and again, we're not in a rush to go through it for the sake of it, but we do want to add value. We really want to contribute, and we want to share some things that may get you to think in a certain direction, move in a certain direction. So I'm going to share my screen. So let us start. Let's start here. Let's see. Okay. So you can just let me know if you can see the screen.
Yep.
Okay. So last week, one of the things that we talked about was accountability. So I wanted to start with this activity, actually. So I wanted you to do an accountability review to really lock down this understanding. So in a moment, we're going to ask you to discuss the following. One, a specific instance where accountability was either lacking or demonstrated. Actually, I want to pause for a moment. We didn't do this exercise last week, did we? Okay,
No, we didn't.
good. Okay, so yeah, this was actually, I set this up for last week, but we didn't do it last week, so we'll do it now. Number one, because again, BT Swami would speak about this many, many times. We really want to help each other to grow. So whenever you come from these sessions, what we're giving you are activities, exercises, and discussions that you can do something with, tangible stuff that you can apply, okay? And stuff that you can reflect on. And to be honest, there's a hidden meaning behind these exercises. When you ask a question in a certain direction, it causes people to broaden their horizons. And when you change the way you look at the world that you look at starts to change. Okay, so once you've seen something, you can't unsee it. And that's the value of wisdom. Every time we come together and we discuss something, it opens your horizon a little bit. And what you will start to see, and I'm sure many of you have seen this, is that when you go back out into the world and speak to people, you can see the difference. You can start to see what they don't see. Because as you've had your horizons broadened, you'll start to see, oh, right, you don't understand that point. And it's no one's fault. We were all on that same journey. And then you can start to broaden other people's horizons in the same way through these exercises, through these discussions. And it's important what we see, because seeing relates to thinking. When we see something differently, we start to feel differently about it. And when we feel differently about that particular situation, we'll act differently. So the precursor to action is actually emotion. Yeah, it's not thinking. The direct precursor to action is emotion. When you feel strongly enough about something, you'll act differently. So we're starting that chain. You're going to discuss a specific instance where accountability was either demonstrated or lacking. And you're going to share experiences and feedback on how and why that was the case, right? So if it was demonstrated, what was it? How did you create that space where people were ready to be accountable? Because to be honest, to Rickens' point, we have many leaders who are not accountable. And then what happens is people watch that leader and then they think, well, if he or she isn't accountable, why should I be accountable? So we create that global culture. So when it was done successfully, when it was demonstrated, what made that person comfortable in being accountable? When it wasn't demonstrated, what was it that caused people to think, you know what, I'm not gonna accept, even though it's my fault, I'm gonna hide. I know, for example, that where I've led teams and I've not made certain people feel comfortable by demonstrating that I make mistakes, because I don't demonstrate it, then everyone else thinks that there's some kind of taboo in admitting, okay, I got it wrong. And then they won't be honest about the mistakes that they make. So I know that sometimes where this has not worked is because I forgot to be transparent and talk about my own failings. You see? And even though I didn't mean to, I created an impression in the mind of the team that, oh, Ed doesn't get anything wrong, right? That's how I should be. And then of course we all make mistakes, but then they hide it. So I can see that that was a learning for me. So where it hasn't worked, it's, for example, this is one example, is when I've not demonstrated a transparency and vulnerability about my own mistakes, where I've had responsibility and missed something. You see? Now, where it has worked, where people are ready to be accountable is when they've seen that if I'm accountable, I'm not going to get blamed, criticized, labeled. You know, I was discussing this just this week with an entire group of people, and even something small like using we language, something's gone wrong. If I always as a leader say, okay, what can we learn from it? What can we do about it? Then everyone else is much more likely to say, actually, I was responsible for that, because I'm not stigmatizing them. But if I don't do that, then it's like, well, no, it wasn't my fault, it was him. Or no, it wasn't my fault, it was her. So just think about that. And when you're sharing with your partner for this activity, I want you to actively listen and provide constructive feedback to your peers to help build an understanding of the impact of their actions on the team's performance, especially around accountability. So we're looking at how do I create that environment where the team will actually be inspired to be accountable. What are the things that I should do to encourage it? What are the things that I should avoid, which cause people not to be accountable? Okay, this is where we're going with this exercise. Well, I'm going to ask Ricken, are you comfortable to make some breakout rooms, maybe groups of 3? Is that possible?
Doing it now.
Thank you so much. Okay, are there any questions about the exercise before we send you into the breakout rooms to have this discussion? And by the way, when you discuss, I want you to write down your best practices and your ideas, because when you come back, I'm going to ask you to share so we can all learn from each other. Because millions, I repeat, millions of pounds or dollars are lost in global communities around the world because often the leaders don't know how to inspire accountability on their team. And there's a great art or science to how to do this, and we're going to flush this out in this particular session. Okay. Yes, Ronnie.
Sorry, I just want to check, Ed, the third point, I'm not too clear.
Sure.
And when we're looking at these particular instances, we're looking for in our own world. So we're not a third party. It's not like an observation of a political leader or something.
No, in our own world, okay? But for points number 1 and 2, if you have any other best practices that you want to share, so in other words, actually what we'll do is, when you're looking at it beyond your own world, we'll do that in the debrief. But when you're talking about it for this exercise, we're talking about us. I want to make it up close and personal. When I've seen it work well, what caused it? When I've seen it directly work well. When it didn't work, what can I learn? Yeah, is that okay, Ronnie?
Yeah.
Thank you. Are the rooms ready, Ricken?
They are ready to go.
Okay. Any other questions that I can clarify before we go into the exercise? Okay. And when we do this, please, as I said, write down what you hear and what you learn. We'll see you back soon. Just checking Paul and Rasa. Are you able to go into your breakouts?
It says Rasa hasn't joined and Paul hasn't joined.
Oh, they haven't joined their breakouts. Okay.
Okay, so 1 second. I'll just.
I'm actually driving, so I can't take notes or do much.
Oh, no problem. Paul,
Nice to see you, Joe.
do you want to move into the room and just chat with your partner?
It's kind of difficult because I'm used to being fully present, and while driving, I can't really take notes or do stuff. So I prefer to
No problem. Okay, I'm just gonna move Avantika. I will just move you because sorry, Paul was supposed to be your partner, Avantika.
And by the way, Russ 6, so she's just listening in. She's left a message on the WhatsApp on the chat.
Okay, so I will move her also just to a room.
And thanks for sharing the screenshot, Rikin and Brishesh. Yeah, that was good.
All right. And then what I'll do, I'll assign you to a room. And I'll also join it.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe I'm telling from my last year's the biggest school. It's how you are building the culture of trust. It's just in whatever relationship is this, and very let's say crucial point what we discussed also with Aida and Ronnie is this of course the integrity and accountability, and how you do this actually it's one of the points is just getting back to yourself. What is my part out of that? Yeah. So it's all the time when you, that's my you request the accountability, you expect accountability. It's all the times the turning around. Okay, what's my role in that relationship? Where did I miss some accountability parts so that it gets out of the way you were expecting it to happen. And the second probably this vulnerability. So that's my biggest school of the recent year, that's getting vulnerable with the topics and it's not a weak point. It's just actually the moving point when you do not find any other way. So it just naming it, speaking that up, also first admitting you are a part out of it and naming it after the reflection, and also requesting and speaking up from others. And I was giving the example of personal relationships, because for me personally in the business it's easier as a very personal, because you are much more likely to accept much more of different things, and actually at the end of the day it always turns out how are you in every kind of relationship and acting. It just continues the way in when we go to the corporate relationships, or when we go to some political expectations and everything. And out of the today's that to build a team means building a culture of trust. I just remembered we did very interesting exercise, and I've maybe shortly sharing that was the trust battery or trust that everybody in the teams just evaluates the person how much you trust it, and you just name percentage of and just shortly explaining what are the main criterions after that. And what can be done, to what is expected that the battery fills again. So what you expect for your counterparts, that you gain the trust back. And it just out of it, you are not criticizing, or you just questioning another sides to understand the communication. So that's again this part of vulnerability, that you name the things and being open, and you hear, not defend, not protect yourself, but just trying to take the points out of that.
Fantastic, thank you. And I really love that. One idea that is inspired by what you just shared. Now I'll come to Ambika in a moment. I'm thinking now, some of the projects I'm involved in, I should actually have a meeting and say in the meeting, what can we do to, as a collective, what ideas do we have as a collective to raise the level of accountability? So while I'm picking up an idea that you've inspired, I know it's not something that you said directly, but you talked about what role do I play in the whole thing, which I think is very, very powerful. And so, yeah, just it's very, very interesting, because if I think about what role I could play, I can always see where can I improve to raise the level of accountability generally. Thank you very much for sharing that, Christina. I'm going to go to Ambika.
Hey, Ed.
Hey.
So this was such an interesting reflection. From our team perspective, part of almost every senior leadership, senior coach agreement, there is something incorporated, which is the buck stops with you. So if you're a head coach of a program, the buck stops with you. And what's great to see over the years is the leaders that come on really take on that way of being. So sharing with Alicia, we're going through creating a spin-off company for a certified performance coaching program. We're running coaching programs for 4 years, and it's going to a different way of doing it, which is just more standard with international protocols. And there's so many teething issues and so many pilots going on at the moment. And with me working on something for the last couple of months, and then I was like, great, this is good to go. And there was certain things that just weren't clicking well. And I was like, okay, chop and change, they'll be fine. And then we got a new lead on board, so I'm training her, got on board. And then I just showed Ronnie the final version, and never to do or do have those kind of conversations at 11 p.m. because A, there's fatigue, and B, if anything does come up, then it's a late night. But anyways, I did. And then he flagged some fundamental structural breakdowns, or just like flaws in the design of this new leadership structure. And whilst we say the buck stops with me, there was 2 interesting evolutions that happened. He shared what he did, and after like a lot of inner resistance and pushing back, I got his point. The next morning we called the head coach of that particular program, of like our health program, and said, look, this is what it is. We're gonna have to change the coach's structure because this one aspect doesn't work. And this guy just got it. He got it, the head coach, he rolled with it, and his message to the coaches was so amazing and kick-ass, which is, guys, we've identified some functional flaw, so we're going to change the coaches' structures, coaches' times. After it took several weeks to get those times in, and I'm fully responsible for what this breakdown is, and he's taking responsibility for the whole breakdown, right? So I was really just in deep admiration of his extraordinary leadership. So that's one. Simultaneously, what I was really present to is almost the opposite reaction, which was there was such reaction and attachment to just wanting to make it work, to go ahead with what was worked on for so long. Number 2, the concern of like what coaches will think if we chop and change something now after a program has just launched, right? 3 days ago, we look sloppy, like just the concern of judgment, right? Like all of that. But that wasn't there for the head coach. And what I was sharing with Alicia is what was there for me was, and maybe it's because it's Ronnie, like somebody so close that I'm working with them in those moments. But when he flagged the flaws, it was myself and the lead. Like we called her in London. We're like, can you get on a call? It was 10:30 her time in UK, 12:30 our time, 12:30 a.m. Zambia time. And we're like, SOS. She gets on the call. She's cool. She just listens through. But I really got present to how reactionary I can get in terms of irritable, wanting to be right. And so from accountability perspective, I realized it's not just the doing. It's not even just the, okay, I take ownership of it. It's actually how we show up in every moment that paves the path for others, right? And I loved how the lead was, she's like, okay, I'm going to marinate over this and come back. And I was like, that's such a great way of processing this. Whereas my immediate go-to place in that conversation was like to justify why the current model should go ahead. And so this exercise has been so great to witness great leadership and also my areas of development, and just how as leaders, it's so important in those moments of everything feeling like whatever you worked on being pulled apart, how we hold ourselves in those moments is also so important. And it's not being fake and calm and collected, but just to work on the inner self so that those external disruptions don't create an internal disruption.
Thank you. I really appreciate your vulnerability. And also, when you've spoken, you've highlighted to me that these are all learning opportunities as well, because you talked about, and I could relate to that, wanting it to be right. So I've done it, so it must be correct. And then it's like, well, no, this can be done differently. It should be done differently. And recognizing how, yes, we want to be conscious of how we show up, but we also want to make sure that it doesn't stop us from doing what's best ultimately. So I really appreciate that point. Thank you very much, Ambika. Very interesting conversation from all of you. Would anyone else like to share something? Because if we can get this right, it can make a huge difference. How do you do it? What were some best practices that you shared?
So I do have one best practice, which actually I learned from someone else, but it's about, 4 different hats that any organization has of a particular, a dominant kind of personality type. It's different from the Myers-Briggs, but I've forgotten the model, but anyways, it is, you have the inventor who is really good with vision and coming up with ideas. And then you have the producer who is really good with the management and the administrative and making sure that everything gets done.
Mhm.
You have the performer who is really good with, with the marketing side of things and making sure that everything looks good and is reaching the audience with the best cosmetics and the best effect. So, and then you have the judge. And the judge is the person who comes in for the review, who comes in for the audits. And each one of these people are so crucial. And sometimes you have a one-person team. So you should make sure that there's a clear separation in each one of the roles when you're performing those roles. Because if you're putting accountability like the inventor, then you're either you're going to paralysis by analysis because nothing is going to go through or everything is going to go through. The performer should never get to judge. The producer will obviously be more focused on the budgets and the timelines and getting things done rather than on the on the quality control so much. And therefore, it is very important to have either have that separate person on your team or peer reviews, or if you are the only person that is in charge of everything, then make sure that you put your inventor, your performer, and your producer hat off when you put the judge hat on. So that was something that has helped me when I've been doing my work.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I mean, again, yeah, Rikin, please.
No, I was just going to ask if Avantika can repeat the 4 hats.
The inventor. It's the person who comes up with the ideas, the big ideas, the vision, and all of that. Need not be the CEO and the strategist. It's just somebody who's really good with creativity. So the inventor. The second one is the producer, the person who kind of does all the program management, make sure things get done. Chief of getting everything done. The third one is the performer, the person who is responsible for making sure that the team looks great. Everything, the effects, the audience management, the face of what the audience gets to see. Someone that you put in front of the client, someone that you put in front of, so just think of, like I'm a content creator. I've got to, the first part of it is as the inventor, I've got to really put together the whole script and the vision and everything. Then as a producer, I've got to produce that whole piece. I've got to make sure that every piece is shot and scripted and done on time. And we're not getting stuck into a loop of paralysis by analysis. As the performer, I've got to put makeup on and get in front of a camera and actually, say things and then do all the edits and then do all the social media management. So engage with my audience and manage the comments and do the live streams and all of that. But as the judge, I get to then watch the final cut and say and edit things out. Just what Ambika said, Ronnie played the role of the judge in that whole conversation. She was the person who was the inventor. And it made sense, again, to have a different person take on the role of the inventor and the producer, and then, get someone else to do. So if you have 2 people, it's always good to have a peer accountability partner that kind of audits you. But the judge's role is so important when the inventor cannot be unbiased. They will be biased. They're so attached to the idea, they cannot, like Ambika was so attached to the idea. It's just that's the nature of how, when we get married to something, it's our baby and we nurture it. And the worst thing we want is for someone to shoot down the practicality in it. And likewise, the producer will not get the passion for the creativity of it. So we'll also be, just focused on making sure it gets done. The performer is so focused on the external audience that, God bless their soul. I know that when I'm focused on, making sure that, the delivery is great and the engagement with the audience is great, I'm not really thinking about very much else. It is only when I get to be the judge and take a look from an external perspective on the impact, the effectiveness, and all that, that it really kind of, sinks in. So yeah, those are the 4 hats.
Thank you. It helped delineate some roles that I really needed to hear with respect to a few projects. So thank you.
Forgive me, I'm going to have to jump because I've got a very tight deadline in terms of one other meeting that I have to go to. So thank you all for sharing this week, and we'll continue the conversation next week. But I'll leave you in Rikin's hands to close as and when he's ready. Thank you.
Please.
It's something I was talking with Ambika with, which I've observed in my own self. It's that I think feedback is the hardest to receive when you are not coming from an internally sort of grounded and strong place. That's kind of the lesson that I've been learning lately. So it's like you're afraid it's going to take you out, or it has you like really unsettled when you get feedback. But when you can just be kind of grounded in yourself and know that it's not a personal attack, I think you can receive it better, because sometimes people are not going to deliver it in the way that you would like. Like I know for myself, I'm someone who is not like a tough love. Like that's not the perspective I usually enjoy receiving from, but some people are going to deliver it to you like that. So I think we miss some of the gems in what they're saying through the delivery. So that's what I've been kind of working on myself, is to take the way it was delivered out and just receive the nuggets and not get so like upset because, now that I'm doing my own thing and I'm on social media more, it's like you're getting feedback from all over unsolicited most of the time. So, at first it was like, oh my God, I can't take this, but now it's like, okay, if I'm not taking it to mean, oh, I'm terrible at what I do, but people are just going to give it how they're going to give it, I can handle it a little better. So that's what I was really thinking. And I feel it applies to this discussion because, when as the leader, when you're getting feedback, you have to be able to just not be so personal with it, I think. And that comes from all the self-work and making sure that you kind of are in a grounded space yourself.
Yeah. It takes a lot of resilience to try to, as a mentor of mine pointed out, like try to see the opportunity in every situation. It's not so easy, but I think at least what you're describing reminds me of this, that the gems are always coming to us, but are we recognizing it? But it's not always, to put that lens on at all times is challenging.
And just one thing I'd like to add to that before I know that I've spoken a lot. Sorry about that.
No, it's fine.
So the one thing that, as Alicia was speaking, it was so important for me. I just got such a brilliant flash of insight into our own, or into all of our natures, is that there are times, because we're such studies in contradictions and paradoxes. There are times, even when everyone is saying something, but you still listen to your gut, because sometimes we also kind of, have, especially when you have people from minorities, whether it's women or, certain cultures who go into leadership positions, they actually suffer from self-doubt a lot and the imposter syndrome. So actually, there is a role that a judge has in one's projects and creativity, but that role should be limited as well. There should be a lot more self-trust. Sometimes the first idea you have is the best idea, it is the right idea. And sometimes, even though everyone is saying it's going to fail, it might be that you have something, a vision for something that you should back, despite the judge coming and say that's not going to fly. So I think everything that has been innovated has come off from someone not listening to a judge. And sometimes that's a price you pay. So I thought it was very important that we also keep that in mind as we set all these checks and balances in place.
Yeah, coming back to what our inner voice is sharing with us as well is what everything external to us. I think it's such a valuable point, because it's very easy as leaders also to get lost in the noise. Yeah, thank you. one thing that Ed and I were just discussing that I wanted to share that I put out to him was just creating a system for accountability, and a system just referring to the fact that holding ourselves accountable and others accountable, it takes work and it's hard and it takes a lot of energy. And I was just sharing with him that, you know, oftentimes when we are involved in many things, that we don't in fact do a good job of not only holding ourselves accountable, but also holding others. And to me, one of the aha moments for me was that, you know, accountability won't happen just by accident, even though sometimes we think it may, that it really, really requires a lot of think time and time to carve out for time that we're just doing this role of the accountability to ourselves as well as to others that we're trying to lead. So that was just one takeaway that I was taking for myself, was just creating that time for accountability, both to ourselves and to others, which sometimes or many times that I won't do. And I think it's under this unrealistic notion that sometimes it happens automatically.
Oh, great point.
So on that note, we will end here and we will pick up next week.
Okay, thanks everyone. So
Yeah.
good to go
Thank
again.
you.
Take care.
Thank
Thanks, Rick.
you.
Good to see you, Avantika, Ida, Christina. See you later, Alicia.